Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to get started here with chapter one and section one. So I'm excited to get this going with you here, and we'll see how this goes, okay? So here's just an image to get us started here for chapter one, and you'll be able to read the captions of all the images on the slide themselves. So go ahead and take a look. And then this is a preview of the subtopics of each lecture. I've labeled them 1.1, 1.2. And then I've got the page numbers in the textbook that correspond with each section. So if you want to read along, those are the pages that we're covering, and each video will be one section. Okay, so that's how we'll do it. All right. So we're going to start with 1.1, an old world, North America, and the purpose of the focus questions is to help you find larger themes and structures to bring the historical evidence, events, and examples together for a connected thematic purpose. So as we go through each portion of this lecture, you may want to keep in mind how the information relates to this larger thematic question. So some suggestions: write this question in the left or right margin of your notes. And then as you go through, mark areas of your notes to come back to later to think about the connection, or as you review your notes later to fill in your thoughts during from the readings or whatever. Write short phrases from the lectures or from the readings that connect the information to each focus question and or are examples that work together to answer the focus question. Okay, so those will be there for you. That'll help you out. So the first Americans to settle what eventually became the United States were culturally diverse, speaking hundreds of languages and living in various types of societies. They migrated by land over the Bering Strait or by sea anywhere from 15,000 to 60,000 years ago, some reaching the southern tip of South America perhaps 11,000 years ago. Facing a warming climate and hunting animals such as woolly mammoth and giant bison into extinction, these first settlers later developed agriculture, including the cultivation of maize, squash, and beans. Emerging around 9,000 years ago, at approximately the same time as agriculture developed in the Near East, the practice allowed settled civilizations to be established. The Americas, Western Europe, and West Africa on the eve of colonization. Countless human settlements on all four continents. People living in farms, in villages and towns, and in cities, including the cities that are marked on the map. So the medieval warm period that began around the year 950 allowed the expansion of agriculture and the rise of cities in North America as it had in Europe and West Africa. The diverse Indian societies of the Americas, first encountered by the Europeans, included civilizations with large populations, cities, and irrigation systems. In North America, about 3,500 years ago, the Mississippian civilization centered their community in the lower river valley of the Mississippi River around a series of semicircular mounds and established extensive trade networks throughout the continent. The largest city north of Mexico was Cahokia, across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis. Ancestors of native peoples of the arid Southwest, including the ancestral Puebloans and the Hungum, constructed elaborate irrigation systems in order to farm in the desert. The medieval warm period ended around 1250, and a colder, less predictable era called the Little Ice Age began. Large-scale agriculture became more difficult, and large centralized societies and urban populations became harder to sustain. People moved out of Mississippian and southwestern cities into smaller scale, more ecologically sustainable towns and surrounding farms. When Spanish explorers came to the Southwest, they called some people the Pueblo Indians because they lived in towns, or pueblos. Towns confederated with related towns but resisted powerful leaders. In some places, larger confederacies formed to bring order to local regions or to fight together against a common enemy. In present-day New York and Pennsylvania, 5 nations, namely the Mohawks, Oneidas, Cayugas, Senecas, and Onondagas, formed a great league of peace. They called their league the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. In the southeast, the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Muskogee, or Creek, and Catawba nations each eventually united dozens of towns in loose alliances. Exchange networks crossed North America carrying local goods such as food, plant dyes and medicines, pottery and quarried rock of various kinds. Trade networks also distributed goods from far away, including shell beads from the coasts, copper from the Great Lakes region, and mica from the Appalachians. Although trading networks spanned the continent, Native Americans remained diverse. In eastern North America, hundreds of peoples inhabited towns and villages scattered from the Gulf of Mexico to present day Canada. They lived on corn, squash, and beans, supplemented by fishing and hunting deer, turkey, and other animals. On the densely populated Pacific coast, hundreds of distinct groups resided in independent villages and lived primarily by fishing, hunting sea mammals, and gathering wild plants and nuts. As many as 25 million salmon swam up the Columbia River each year, providing abundant food. On the Great Plains, with its herds of buffalo, many groups were hunters who tracked animals on foot before the arrival of horses with the Spanish part of the year, while living in agricultural communities in the river valleys when they were not on the hunt. Numerous land systems existed among Native Americans. Generally, however, specific families or towns had the right to farm on certain lands, and nations or confederacies claimed specific areas for hunting, fishing, and gathering. Indians saw land as a resource that particular people had the right to use, but not as an economic commodity that could be bought or sold. Nor were Native Americans devoted to the accumulation of wealth and material goods. However, status certainly mattered. Leaders tended to come from certain families or clans, and they often controlled access to resources. But their reputation and influence rested on their ability to distribute goods with their followers rather than hoarding them for themselves. Generosity was among the most valued social qualities, and gift giving was essential. Trade, for example, meant more than a commercial transaction. It was accompanied by elaborate ceremonies of gift exchange. Under normal circumstances, no one in native societies went hungry or experienced the extreme inequalities of Europe. Native societies were highly gendered, but much more equal than the system of gender relations in Europe. In most native communities, women had responsibility for farming and running the households, including literally building the houses. Although diplomatic leaders were usually men, women generally made the decisions about food cultivation, storage, and preparation. They participated in councils, especially when matters within the realm of women were being considered, including going to war and making peace because of women's roles in life giving and in providing food for battle and diplomacy. Many North American societies were matrilineal, that is, tracing descent through the mother's line and making children members of the mother's family or clan, not the father's. Women generally had some power over their own sexuality in marriage, including divorce. For the diverse native societies of North America, as for people all around the world in the medieval and early modern eras, religion was not simply a matter of spiritual doctrines and practices, but also systems of belief that permeated every aspect of people's lives. Their lives were steeped in religious ceremonies often directly related to farming and hunting. Spiritual power, they believed, suffused the world, and sacred spirits could be found in all kinds of living and inanimate things: animals, plants, trees, water, and wind. Through religious ceremonies, they aimed to harness the aid of powerful supernatural forces to serve human interests. Religious ceremonies sought to engage the spiritual power of nature to secure abundant crops or fend off dangerous spirits. Towns or clans also held elaborate religious rites, participation in which helped to define the boundaries of community membership. Those who seemed to possess special abilities to invoke supernatural powers, namely shamans, medicine men, and other religious leaders, held positions of respect and authority. They did not make a sharp distinction between the natural and the supernatural, or between secular and religious activities. A major difference with Christianity, as well as with Judaism and Islam, was that native North American religions were inclusivist. In theory, at least, Christians were supposed to be exclusively Christian, rejecting all other religions' beliefs. Inclusivist religions, in contrast, allowed adherents to incorporate new religious beliefs and practices as part of a larger effort to make sense of the world. This fundamental difference between inclusivist and exclusivist ways of seeing religion would lead to grave misunderstandings when Christian missionaries tried to convert Native Americans. Many Europeans saw Indians as embodying freedom, but most colonizers quickly concluded that the notion of freedom was alien to Indian societies. Early English and French dictionaries of Indian languages contain no entry for freedom or liberté. Native Americans whose ancestors had been part of Mississippian or other hierarchical societies in previous generations did know about the dangers of excessive power. Unlike Europeans, they had rejected that way of life to develop societies with the kind of freedom that they valued. Europeans considered Indians barbaric in part because they did not appear to live under established governments or fixed laws or have the proper respect for authority. In a sense, they seemed too free, lacking the order and discipline that Europeans considered the hallmarks of civilization. The familiar modern understanding of freedom as personal independence, often based on ownership of private property, had little meaning in native societies. Indian men and women judged one another according to their ability to live up to widely understood ideas of appropriate behavior. Far more important than individual autonomy were kinship ties, the ability to follow one's spiritual values, and the well being and security of one's community. Group autonomy and self determination, as well as the mutual obligations that came with a sense of belonging and connectedness, took precedence over medieval freedom, or individual freedom, I should say. Like medieval and early modern people around the globe, many Native North American societies practiced small scale slavery, mostly enslavement of war captives. Captives had none of the rights or privileges of members of a society. Ripped from their own societies and families, they could be forced to labor or traded away. But slavery was not inheritable, and captives could become full members of the society that adopted them. So that's the end of section one, and we will go from there and see you next time.